How many of you have heard about my after-school environmental film series? First of all, extra credit's a really good idea in this class. It's a good idea for all students. I'm not trying to criticize your potential. I mean to say that even the most intelligent students will occasionally belly flop an exam. And you rack up extra credit as an insurance policy to hedge your bets. Extra credit is earned point by point, and it usually doesn't come cheap in terms of hour investment per point, but it sure does bolster some grades. I'd say the average student goes up by about half a letter grade on the exam average, but that includes all the students who do no extra credit. So there's a lot of students who go up like 1 or 2 or even 3 full letter grades on their exam average. Like before extra credit, like averaging D's, and after extra credit, averaging AB. Like it really helps. A lot of points. I'd like to discuss the after-school environmental films from 3 points of view. First, for you, the audience, my students who go to watch, you just show up on time, enjoy the film, and write some stuff on paper to prove you were here, and then you leave with the paper left behind. Piece of cake. There was some famous debauchery in previous years, so we're going to start recording in order to guarantee that it's like a calm, quiet environment where people are just here to watch the movie.
Are you not here?
I'm not here when the movie is playing. I have a student volunteer and a volunteer adult. We need an adult for legal safety reasons, and we need a student volunteer to run the technology and the logistics. Nice job on the thing. Newsflash, the movies are generally award winners for some reason or another. I've looked at about 80 or 90 movies to identify about 20, of which about 15 or more have won some sort of film awards. Usually they're like independent, smaller films with a few exceptions. I'll let you know there's some movies that are probably kind of bad, but I chose them anyway because they're thematically relevant to the class. They usually connect to the unit that we're in, but they're not academic enough to be a part of the class. They're just kind of peripheral to the content. I like to bring students on board any way I can, so for some of you that's just an easier way to engage with some of the topics. Why not? Yeah?
How long are movies usually, like 2 hours?
Movie length, yeah, hour and a half average. I'll warn you in advance if they're extra long or unusually short or extra grade or unusually horrible. I've seen all of them. You may have already seen some of them. There's rules about how much credit you can get. There's like a limit per unit. You can watch as many as you want in a single week, but you only get credit for 1. If you've seen the movie twice, you only get credit for it once. If you can't watch it twice for 2 points. So I don't know. We'll talk more about the movies later. Anybody have questions about the student relationship to the movies? Like if you're in the audience, you want to ask me anything about that now? How many of you read about it in my packet? In the extra credit section? All right. Most of the details are all in there. It's pretty casual. He went to a bunch. Did you go? She went to a few. I'm trying to cut out the sleaze factor, so Zach's no longer invited. And I've also added the camera. There's also a parent. For legal reasons, I gotta have a grown-up in the room in case you catch on fire or whatever. Just so you know, we cancel movies when we don't have parents, and I will be asking all of your parents to participate, and maybe you could help me out by asking them to participate too. We need a lot of parent volunteers. We burn through them, they eventually get over it. And we have like maybe 40 movie nights this year, so it's really important to have a lot of parents available. Please have them get in touch with me. I'll reach out to them later. What I'm looking for now, though, is the student volunteers. They get double the credit. But they got a lot of work to do. They got to show up early, find a custodian to open up the classroom. They got to come inside and set up the technology and put in the DVD, and make sound check. They got to greet the adult and show the adult their job description and like show like Jose really wants you to do. Don't forget about this and keep an eye on this one because it's kind of shady. And so the volunteer interfaces with the parents. Then the volunteer opens the doors, lets in the kids, passes out the papers, starts the movie at the appropriate time, closes the doors at the appropriate time. During the movie, the volunteer has to get on the internet, find a trailer for the next movie, check the drawer to make sure we have enough copies. They don't have to fill out the worksheet. They just write Jose Supervisor and they get double credit for the movie. But they're working the whole time, and then at the end, they gotta wait for everybody to leave, make sure little Joey gets picked up, or you get a little jump start for Cass's car or whatever. And then like after everybody's already gone, then they gotta close up all the doors and turn off the lights and make sure everything locks so my crap doesn't get stolen.
So you get 2 points instead of 1 for doing it.
That's right.
2 points is significant.
Yeah, and then that's exactly right. It is significant. You do that 3 times in a unit, you just got like 2 letter grades on the exam. It's a big commitment. You're signing up for the whole year. You're responsible for all my stuff. Like if my laptop gets stolen, it's personal now. You can't be a shady individual. I have like 50,000 students that want to do this. Like half my students so far today have volunteered to do it. I'm going to take all of those names and I'm going to walk around to teachers who teach sophomores and be like, yo, have you heard of this kid? How about this one? And we start to pull off the Post-its that are shady people or that have made famous mistakes or whatever. Then I ask all my senior friends, and I'm like, yo, can you recommend any of these? Would you let this person walk into your house and be there when you're not home? And we start to take off some more Post-its. And then when I get it down to a small number, I try to meet all those kids, and if I don't know them already, see if I can find people to vouch for their character. Then I pick 2 people for Tuesday and 2 people for Wednesday. So you can take turns or have an alternate, a person and a backup usually. Sometimes Tuesday will sub for Wednesday or vice versa, but you're signing up for every Tuesday of the year or every Wednesday of the year. Last year, Eli Bauer had to drop it the semester, and Caroline Severson took the job, but then the other 3 people did it all year.
So you can drop if it's just too much.
Yeah, but I'll hate you, like I hate Eli. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not gonna like, no, I'm gonna force you to come in and make you flunk out of school. Like, yeah, if it's too much, you can bail, but I'd like you to be pretty realistic about this when you sign up for it. Yeah?
Is it just like Tuesdays and Wednesdays after school?
Yeah, 6 p.m.
Okay.
I've checked, but Monday, Thursday, Friday seem to have more conflicts.
Yeah.
Like there's always about a quarter of my students can't go at this time. But Monday, Thursday, Friday, it's more than a quarter, so I stick with Tuesday, Wednesday now.
And so 6 p.m.
6 p.m. Anybody else? If you're kind of on the fence or you're not interested, just pass on the Post-it pad. But if you're 100% for real, and you know that you're down for this, name, cell phone, email, and which day you want to do it, Tuesday or Wednesday. Name, cell phone, email, and which day you want to do it. 4 things. I'm sorry, I was hoping you would catch that. I wasn't supposed to hit you in the head. It's fine. I'm really sorry about that. I didn't.
So is this like every single Tuesday or something? Because you said you only had 20 or 15 minutes.
Yeah, so we stop at the review period before the AP exam, so the last 6 weeks of the year is a no-go.
Okay.
And then it's most of the weeks, but like on back to school night we don't do it, and like there's a few nights that we block out. It's basically, I don't think we do it during finals week.
And you top out at 6 points.
The volunteers technically don't cap out. So logistically, if you got to cover for the other person and you got to cover for the other person, they're not forced into the cap.
I have a question.
So the volunteers could theoretically end up with a tremendous number of points. I mean, they're doing a tremendous amount of work for me, so I'm going to reward them for that. Yeah?
Will you have a day where, like, if you want to volunteer, you teach us, like, how to set up the movie?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I train the volunteers. What else? Last time. Okay. Let's talk about Easter Island then. If you didn't read the Easter Island article, don't lie to me. I'll forget, I'm not keeping track. You're not actually busted. I just gotta know who I'm talking to. How many of you actually read the cartoony Easter Island article? Don't lie to me. Don't lie to me. You lie. Alright. Story of Easter Island is what? What happened? What's the punchline? Trees get cut, everybody dies. Bravo. I tell you what, people use this story as like the great parable of environmental folly. Third graders hear that if you cut down all the trees, everybody dies, aka the Lorax. Environmental science courses all over the world start with that story. I don't know if you noticed this, but in that reading packet, you'll see that the Easter Island story was page number 1, chapter number 1 in the Cartoon Guide to Environmental Science, which is a textbook that has a whole bunch of stuff about environmental science. But on the first page, the first thing they talk about is this intro, because, you know, you cut down the trees and Lorax. There's nothing wrong with this example, there's nothing wrong with this parable, but there's more meaning in the story, and that's what I'd like to discuss today. I see like a narrative bullseye here, where like on the surface, the outer layer of our moral jawbreaker is the cut down trees, everybody dies, number 1. That's the topical part. I'd like to look at number 2 also, which might be social patterns, and then I'd like to look at the number 3 also, which is, yo, what do we want to do with this? So, I made a slideshow, it's got some nice pictures. I'll give you one little tidbit of factual information. Rapa Nui was the name before a white guy came to call it Easter Island. Like so many things, we're on the white guy team, so we use the white guy name. But I don't know which type of history you believe is most memorable. It was called Rapa Nui for at least 1,300 years. It was named Easter Island in the 1700s by a Dutch admiral who saw it from a boat on Easter Sunday. So he drew it on the map as the island you saw on Easter Sunday. So you can choose which of these names is the one that you feel is the most appropriate. I will use them interchangeably. Easter Island is the name of the island. It's also called Rapa Nui, and coincidentally, the people are called Easter Islanders or Rapa Nui. Yeah?
In like Polynesian places, it's also called different names other than Rapa Nui.
No kidding.
Like in Tahiti, they call it Rapa Tanui.
In where?
Tahiti.
Interesting. The Tahitians call this island that name, or that's the name of Tahiti?
No, that's what they call this island.
Oh, very interesting. I had no idea. You know Polynesian things? slippery slope because I have a soft spot for Polynesians, you know. All right. There's the island. It is the furthest you can get with a permanent inhabitation from another permanent inhabitation. So it's 1,280 miles or something from Pitcairn Island, and it's something like 2,400 miles or so from Chile. And it was probably first visited around the year 500 by Polynesians who, I was just telling Cass, I have a soft spot for Polynesians because I think they're the raddest humans ever. Polynesians are like the most hardcore people, I think. Yeah. If I could just like cherry pick a culture to transform myself into, I would like to be Polynesian. So many choices too. The Polynesians rowed probably as much as 3 months in doubled canoes with a little wind assist from time to time, wearing helmets so their brains wouldn't cook. You can imagine they slept in the lap of the dude behind them, which gets awkward for everybody. They couldn't put a lot of food on there, so they didn't carry a lot of food. They would free gaff migratory fish, meaning use a bar with a hook on it, which is pretty badass. 100 Ways to Sunday. They would lay down the sail and capture some rainfall, and everything else they did was row. Just like all day. So gnarly. Unbelievable gnarliness. We today describe this as primitive navigation, which is probably not fair. That word has a lot of connotation. Keep in mind they had no sextants, no compasses, no maps, no crow's nest, no monocles, or whatever you call those things. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anna Martin is new, so I know who she is. Cosmoli is Francisco your other name? Yeah. See, that's now we're gonna have another problem. I finally learned one, and it's the wrong one. They had like polarizers that they would drop to obscure their vision so they wouldn't go snowblind or glare blind. I don't know, what else is rad about this story? Could it get any radder? Yeah, 3 months in blue water. In boats that last no more than 3 months in the water, they rot. They're made out of palm trees usually. So you know palm when it gets wet starts to fall apart. Yeah?
So they guided themselves like exclusively with stars?
As a matter of fact, I've heard that it wasn't as much celestial as it was biotic navigation. Yeah, it means you learn patterns of migratory life.
There's no like checkpoint islands, like where you could.
It's my understanding that no, on the last run, this is considered one of the greatest feats of open water navigation because there must be, right? It's not going to be 1,300 miles without some island. Mm. But I don't think that there's many, and I'm guessing that they're not major. And they're at sea level, you know. It's not like you can get up in the crow's nest and like look any higher. So it doesn't take a lot of water for the curvature of the earth and the ripples of the ocean and the heat glaze to obscure them. Anyway, I think that this was one of the greatest things that humans have ever done. The Polynesians had 3 waves of colonization coming somewhere from Eastern Asia, and everybody wants to claim the Polynesians, but we're not sure where. So Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, Laotians, Vietnamese have all at some time or another claimed ancestry to Polynesians, but as far as I have heard, it's still kind of hazy. From some starting point There was the first wave of Greater Micronesian pollinization, the second wave where I don't know the name of all these islands, and then the third wave, which is those 3 red arrows, Hawaii natives, Rapa Nui, and Maori. They found this little dry island. It's volcanic, it's hot, dry, windy. All Pacific Islands actually along the equator are hot, dry, and windy. As a global average, they're actually kind of hostile. But among that average, Easter Island is especially hostile. It's hotter, drier, and windier than even the equatorial island average. The island is small, 64 square miles. Consider that Santa Cruz Island is 96 square miles. So an island 2/3 the size of Santa Cruz. How many of you have been to Santa Cruz Island? Now imagine an island 2/3 that size with a maximum population of somewhere between 15 and 20,000 humans. That's actually a really big number. I've been all over that island. You can pretty much walk from end to end in a single day. Packing 20,000 people into an island 2/3 that size is already sounding pretty marginal. I can imagine that ending bad a lot of different ways. One thing that the Polynesians really like, though, is this is a great place for fishing. A little bit of climate science for a minute here. Do you all know that offshore wind is when wind goes from land to the ocean? Surfers know when it's offshore, waves get more hollow. Good news. How many of you have heard this word before, offshore wind? Okay, so when the wind blows from land to the sea, it pushes surface water away, and water doesn't all pile up on the horizon. It has to level itself. So when you push away surface water, you draw it up from underneath where it's colder, and colder water holds more nutrients. So areas with offshore wind have upwelling. More nutrients means more productive water, more algae, more plankton, more little fish, more big fish, more fishing. Good. And remember, I told you that it's an especially windy island, so there's always wind coming from some direction, and it's an island. So wherever the wind comes, there's going to be offshore happening and upwelling and fishing happening somewhere. So migratory fish just circle the island looking for the upwelling all day. And the Polynesians notice this, and they're like, dang, we should come live here. So they send back some homies, and they pick up the families and the pigs, and they come take over. The earliest evidence of humans on the island is 500 AD. By 800 AD, there was like villages all over and people all around the island. Those first 300 years, very little human evidence. There was obviously colonization happening, but not a lot of notable artifact in the ground. One thing that's famous about the island, I'm sure you've heard about it, is they had a giant palm tree. I can't show you any pictures of that palm tree. Why not? That's right, there's none left. If you know palm trees, the giant Easter Island palm is very similar to the Chilean bottle palm. I believe that's the largest palm tree today. It's a big old palm tree. I found some picture of a palm tree farm where they grow giant palm trees in Senegal, but these are little baby plants. If I was going to show you pictures of the giant Easter Island palm, I'd have nothing to show you. You've probably heard about the heads, the moi. Somewhere between the year 1000 and the year 1600, the Rapa Nui carved 887 of these statues. Each one took many, many years, over a decade to carve. They averaged 13 feet tall, some were flirting with 20. A column of rock 13 feet high is very, very heavy. Polynesians had a lot of practice because Polynesian cultures all over the world have some sort of ritualistic or culturally connected carving activity. In many Polynesian cultures, carving is the primary social, artistic activity, recreation time. You take the homies and you go to the rock and you all carve together. There are Polynesian cultures that make large pillars with flower pots on top. Polynesian cultures that make geometric patterns. You might have heard of the world's largest currency is a type of Polynesian carved rock where you can't move the money, so when I buy the house, now it's your rock. These things were organized in clusters along the coast with their backs turned to the ocean. See that row on the left? They're facing the land, not the sea. Couple interpretations. Some people say it's a historic reflection of the past being behind us when we were ocean going, but now we look forward to the land. Most people say it's an artifact of warrior culture, that many Polynesian societies have some sort of shows of bravado or courage. And to show your opponent you're not afraid, you turn your back on them. So I'm not afraid of you raiding me. I'm not even going to look out to sea. That it would be too paranoid to have your statues face the ocean. Because it would show fear. Neat, right? These clusters are found all along the island because the society was organized into villages. The chief who was in charge of that village, it was his land, his boats, his statues, had a bunch of people working for him. And obviously he must be a great man to be so successful and have this land and stuff because his ancestors were great people. And we would build statues to his ancestors because that iconography ensures their protection. You keep your ancestors nearby to keep an eye on you. If I am grateful to my chief for feeding me and giving me a place to live, I'm going to take all my homies. We're going to go carve a statue for him. After 20 years, I pay my rent, so to speak, by bringing over this one statue that me and my homies built for your uncle, who was a really cool dude, and I'm sorry he's dead, but hopefully he'll keep an eye on us and make us a greater village. Got it? Iconography of greatness. If it turns out he's a jackass, I deface his statues, knock him over, and go live with some other guy probably who has more statues, because his family's even better, and there's even more protective ancestry to ensure our future success. Traditional sculptures, right? Good? By the way, just saying by coincidence, notice how important it is who we choose to make statues for. You all know it's 2017, right?
Yeah.
Fun fact, they were carved from bedrock. They were moved, not like this. The story that we tell the third graders is they ran out of trees because they made rollers to push the statues around. Turns out that's not accurate. When people did the math, you know, palm trees are kind of lumpy and they're kind of spongy. So A, they don't roll very well, and B, if you put a lot of weight on them, they start to buckle. Because they hold so much water, under a lot of weight, when you roll them, they start to collapse and make a flat spot, and then it's kind of hard to roll them, and they start to mash up and they break. So you do like the density, size of rock, you like nerding out, and you like get a sharp pencil, and you figure out you can't palm tree them. So this was a movie where you can see they were trying to show the common story of how the statues were moved. But it turns out that the science shows you can't do that. So for a few decades there was a lot of mystery where people would say, how did this happen? And obviously we couldn't roll them. And you ask the Rapa Nui how they rolled them, and they'd be like, they walked. And all the Westerners are like, you silly little Indian. Of course they didn't walk. They're up in there like, nah, homie, they like walked. And everybody's like, oh, you ignorant primitives. And Rapa Nui have survivors today who will all tell you there's like terminology for this and like the stories of the Mois about them walking. And some dude at MIT was like, and he did some like hardcore nerding. Ta-da! Palm trees are not very good at rolling, but they're very, very good at leveraging. And if you've ever moved a refrigerator, where you have to like walk it along, alternating corners, please tell me you've moved a refrigerator or seen somebody move a refrigerator. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
That's how the Moi moved. And they walked. People would lift one end and they would walk them. Thing. Look at that guy's hands, by the way. There's a man who's never touched dirt. I love it. Little pianist hands. I halfway mock somebody whose hands look that nice, and then I'm also secretly jealous because my wife hates my hands. Not a good thing. Not because of fist mode. She hates them because of animal dirt. Okay. Back to Easter Island. You dig through the dirt. If you start at the bottom, which is the furthest past, you find no humans. Then you find a few humans. Then you find like 300, 400, 500 years of a few humans. By the year 1000, you start to find a lot of healthy human bones. Very, very few infant bones. What does that tell you?
Low infant death.
Low infant mortality, that's right. Then you look at the number of bones per layer, and it looks like people were living healthy, long, well-fed lives, making lots of healthy babies with low infant mortality. See a population boom, about 500-600 years of exploding population. Mixed in with those bones are well-fed pig bones, dolphin bones, apparently they ate dolphins, and big game fish, like Dorado and like tuna and stuff. These guys were eating all right. They were eating all right. You find no evidence of like malformed bones that would indicate malnutrition. You don't find any thin, brittle bones, which would indicate stress or other types of hunger. And you just find like greater and greater human density until you find a very thin layer that looks starkly different. In that layer, you find a lot of ashes, abnormally high levels of salt crystals, or evidence of salt being mixed with rocks in sedimentary process. Evidence of salt. Then you find a lot of infant bones, baby bones, like hungry human bones. Seagull, pelican, barnacles and little crabs. We believe what happened was that there was a period of fires that spread across an arid environment. We know that it was an arid environment because if you carbon date that ash, it correlates to an El Nino cycle that occurred throughout much of the Pacific at the time. There was an especially bad El Nino for a few years. So we believe extended drought dried up the land, easier for it to all burn down. All the salt is from all that crazy wind with no trees to block. It would allow salt spray to cover the land. When salt is added to dirt, plants don't grow as well. We find no more evidence of trees and no more evidence of seafood. It looks like without the boats to make the short-lived fishing vessels, that the Rapa Nui ate all of the seagulls and all the pelicans and all the terns. They picked through all of the tide pools. They were out of pigs. They couldn't farm anything else. And pretty soon there's another layer. Human bones with a lot of scrapes along the long bones and a lot of cracked femurs. What does that indicate? That's right. You take the meat off the long bones, you crack the femurs for the marrow. Then you don't find many human remains for a couple hundred years. It seems really clear that as the island's ability to provide food went downhill, less and less topsoil, less and less farming, less and less natural feed to grow pigs, less and less trees to go fishing. Changes in climate seem to accelerate the decline, kind of get you over the tipping point. There was both a period of vandalizing statues and also accelerating their building. You can imagine. Everybody got tired of this chief, so they mess up his statue and they knock it over, and they are all recruited by the guy who's got the most people making statues to his growing pool of ancestors. You know, a lot of people reshuffling their teams. Civil warfare, eating each other, and very few survivors. Remember I told you that those statues were mined and out of like bedrock. You can see the mines today. You can just like tourist right on up there and see where somebody walked away. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard a story that there are places where they found the actual tools on top of the statue. Like somebody was just like, nope, and left. It's hard for me to believe that because they're like 600-year-old tools. I imagine someone would have taken them by now, but that's what I've heard. In a movie that dramatized one of these into the ocean, apparently that's bogus because you could never push them past the surf, right? Remember I told you that a Dutch admiral found the island on Easter Sunday? He didn't meet anybody because he didn't even go on land. He named it on a drive-by because it wasn't worth stopping by to look. 50 years later, James Cook actually got off, sent people, looked around the island. Some dude painted the Indians. And in James Cook's diary, he described them as small, lean, timid, and miserable. Packed up his ship and left. Not good enough to colonize, apparently. But they were good enough to enslave. So about half those islanders were stolen and sold to a Peruvian guano mine as slave labor, where most of them, I believe, did not have children. A few remained on the island. They did a census in 1872 with 111 Rapa Nui on the island. And it's rare that you see this, but a sovereign nation asked to be adopted, and they were annexed by Chile a few years later. Kind of amazing. Rapa Nui culture actually seems to have remained relatively intact through this time. Like today, the mayor is a direct descendant of the first Polynesians, and he's got a Rapa Nui name, and I think that they are all called Rapu. Like their last name is Rapu. I don't know if that's a coincidence for just him, but I believe that all the Rapa Nui are last name Rapu.
Wait, what are like the living conditions on the island like?
You would probably call it subsistence farming and fishing. You know, 20,000 people is too many for the island, but at some point, imagine that at some point, one of the guys was like, I don't need to eat, you're right, because it's just the two of us on this island now, so we could probably just go farm again. So when the numbers got really, really small, a few people escaped that cannibal period and went on to remain on the island. There's very few trees on the island, but there are more and more in the last 100 years. Now there's a few little gardens and farms, and there's a city there. And they have cell service, or like an airplane, roads and parking lots and stuff. It's like a tourist thing. People live there surf a lot.
Good surfing.
But I tell you what, it's kind of a sad story. I'm like glad to hear that there is some cultural record surviving, but not much. Yeah.
I'm just wondering why they stopped fishing.
Well, historically, it's believed that there was literally the last boat somewhere. So I'm not really clear on the details, but when that Dutch guy saw the island from the boat, he wrote, "Not worth going ashore, no vegetation overhead." So when they circled the island, they couldn't see, if you believe his notes, any trees at all. When James Cook went there, he said that there were no trees over 10 feet. So you can imagine that it probably wouldn't have been an option to carve boats anymore. You could probably fish from shore. You could probably, I don't know, spear stuff. I don't know. That period between the cannibal age of 1600s and 150 years later, James Cook coming to the island, sounds pretty grim to me. But that's multiple human generations, so the few must have made it. I don't know what the conditions were like. Remember I told you there's different layers to the story? Now I'd like to do that part, okay? If you were going to take notes, it wouldn't take very much. Deforestation, erosion, collapse of food systems, changing climate, civil structure collapse, warfare, cannibalism, the end. Oh, you know one of the things that survives in Rapa Nui culture today? An insult. I don't know how this translates, but the insult says, "Your mother's flesh sticks to my teeth." How about that? Like you get in a fight, it's "Shut up, you stupid, F you, well, F you, or your mom's flesh sticks to my teeth." Like, ooh, he got you. And talk about cultural injury, right? Like our words say a lot about where we come from, you know, and for that to be the insult is like, dang, that cannibalism left a scar, so to speak.
Wasn't there like cannibalism wasn't just native to Easter Island? There was a lot of cannibalism around Polynesia.
And here's where the story, I think, like the plot thickens a little bit. A lot of time when we tell the story, we tell it from the cultural shelter of our dominant history where we've kind of whitewashed a lot of the facts away. And a lot of times that we talk about Easter Island, we talk about this as a narrative of folly among, coincidentally, people with darker skin. Haha. But I'd like to point out that this is not a unique story at all. As a matter of fact, if you want to know how all the other cultures ended, it's almost always that recipe. This is not an exception to the rule among human societies. It is the rule among human societies. And I find this very striking. Close to us, the Anasazi were debatably the most successful American nation before Europeans came. You could say Cherokee, you could say Lakota. I don't really know, I'm not an expert. But the Anasazi were clearly successful in a really harsh environment, the American Southwest. where it's like desert and hot and hard to make a living. These dudes had like architectural accomplishments and agricultural success. They farmed floodplains. With the Three Sisters, maybe you've heard of this traditional coupling of crops that are all easy to store and irrigate with floods. Corn, squash, and beans. So they would grow those three. Most of those round structures were for food storage. They had some types of round structures for ceremonial purposes, but most of them were silos. And the Anasazi littered the landscape with these agricultural centers. Any place that you find a floodplain, you grow a bunch of food, and then you take all the extra and you quote unquote pay your taxes through a network of advanced roads and stuff to the like cultural power center, which provides military protection and other cultural relationship things. But you know, climate's always changing. And in a period of extreme drought through the American Southwest, food productivity seems to have tapered. There was less flood, so less floodplains, so less corn and beans and food to store. And a lot of those agricultural regions went rogue and said, peace out, we're not sending taxes, we'll do it on our own. And then warfare, civil collapse, people ate each other. Maybe you don't connect with our native past on this country, but maybe you know Mesoamerica? Same thing. Successful advanced society, roads, trade networks, advanced science, predicting astrological events, astronomical events far out in the future, really successful agriculture. They terraced forest. Same thing, a network of food production areas that were trading extra food in exchange for art and music and cultural and military protection and stuff. In this case, the climate change was of the wetter kind. They got a bunch of rain, all those fields washed away, collapse, warfare, vandalized the statues. You can go to a bunch of Mayan ruins and see where people lost faith in their leadership because they messed up their faces for their statues. We do topple statues, by the way. Just saying, that's an option. We all cheered when they did it to the dude in the rock, you know. And the same kind of collapse. We find evidence of cannibalism. Crazy thing about Mayans, fun fact in case anybody's curious, one of the only societies that disbanded. Descendants of the Mayans were like, nah, I'm gonna go back to the forest, and they just like split and went back to being hunter-gatherers, which is very rare in cultural histories. I find it to be totally fascinating. There's evidence of hunter-gatherers returning to the ruins of Mayan culture and using them as like a place to have a bonfire and chill and like slaughter a monkey or something. Yeah.
So did the Mayan culture also end up kind of in warfare?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's called the warfare period, by the way. I don't remember the dates, but I visited a bunch of Mayan sites in Belize and Mexico, and like, there was like a period of like extreme warfare. All you white people thought you were going to get out of this without me picking on your skin color, but nope, the Vikings did this too. You've heard about Vikings and like they're crazy. Have you heard about berserk warfare? Berserker? Uncontrolled aggression, violence without rules. Imagine how difficult it must be for those warriors to live with themselves when they would show up at a village and just slaughter and rape and burn everything. Apparently it's really easy if you're tripping on mushrooms. This is not a joke. It's called the berserker mushroom, Amanita muscaria. They would like harvest the fly agaric, red mushroom with the little white apples on top that's like the Smurf houses. People would like stir up a big pot and be like, all right, we go to war! And everybody would like pound the juice. And like an hour later, they're like, whoa! And you're like having an out-of-body experience looking at somebody that looks like you. Like, holy crap, look at that guy go! And he's just like burning and raping everything. And then you wake up the next day like, holy crap, I'm so sore, what happened? And like, imagine having soldiers with no conscience. Military Ingenuity 101. Vikings conquered the map. They just took it. But global cooling, less evaporation, less rainfall on the coast, less productivity, less food returns, warfare, collapse, cannibalism. And I could keep going, but I don't have the time. I have a short slideshow. You can read the book. This is the story of most societies. It's not like, hey, there's a weird thing where if you cut down the trees, everybody eats each other. It's like, yo, here is the rule of humanity. That pretty much we do this thing. Number 2, our pattern. We max out food production, indulge in cultural complexities, and since climate's always changing, that falls apart and then we eat each other. It sounds a little bit less third grade when you tell people that that's where all other societies went to, the same path as the Rapa Nui. So I give you number 3. What do we see? We maxed out food production sometime in the 1970s in this country. And globally, we've been flirting with maximum food production about as long as you've been alive. We really can't intensify food production much more on this planet. We're within a very small margin of error for maximum food on Earth. Climate is changing at unprecedented rates. If you don't want to blame the petroleum industry, you could say, well, fine, we don't need to talk about that right now. But in the history of geoclimate study, we have never seen climate change this quickly. The closest you can come to is those other mass extinctions, where climate was changed by meteor strikes or volcanic eruptions. Now that everything is changing so quickly, ask our friends in Texas how much things are changing. Now that things are changing so quickly, and we've maxed out our food, you know what else is happening all over the map? Food shortage related civil warfare, aka the Sudan, aka Syria, aka we keep talking about North Korea and we forget they're the hungriest people on the planet. Everybody talking about how bad this one guy is. I'm not going to stick up for him, you know. Kim Jong, which one is this? Il or Un? Un. Everybody talks about how I'm not going to stick up for him. I don't care. But you know, just saying that they are also the hungriest nation. What did you say?
Oh, I remember reading somewhere about there's like food riots in Mexico City or something.
Oh, Venezuela maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to look very far. You don't have to wait very long. You know, hungry people are going to fight. And like, where are we on the spectrum right now? Like, how long until your mom's flesh sticks to my teeth? I think that when you tell the story to the 3rd grader, it's like, oh, trees are important, thanks. And like, that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. And then when you look at this like anthropological story about how cultures go, it's like, whoa, that's fascinating. Thank God that Europeans are so superior that we would never do the same thing because now we have cell phones, duh. And then I wonder if like maybe there isn't like nagging over my shoulder this other central concern that's like, wait a minute, I see a pattern here that is kind of at play in my world today. And I really wonder which society we're going to be. You know, some societies pulled it off. Fun fact, like the Irish and the Scottish have been through food crises a zillion times and they did not actually have a lot of cannibalism. Persians go back, like, I don't know, anybody want to give me the right number? 12,000 years maybe? How long have people been living in what you now call Iran? Very, very, very little cannibalism in the history of Persia. There's societies that are like, oh dang, okay, we need some new allegiances and come up with some new food and let's not eat each other. And they're like, oh, all right, we can do this. The whole like doubling down on more sculptures thing, 2017, y'all. Like, that seems like a pretty sketchy pattern. The whole like, I'm gonna go fight that guy and take all his stuff! Loser, I'm gonna eat him! Yeah! Like, that does not sound good. Like, let's not get into that pattern. Okay. I'm done with my scary story for the day. How much time do we got? 2-3 minutes? Where does this put us? We could probably stop there.